I'm Misti Green, and this is the I Lead Misty Blue podcast, where strategy meets soul and faith finds its voice. If you've been following this journey, you know this is part of an ongoing conversation about accepting versus understanding and learning how to shift from suspended to settled. We've walked with Jesus through nevertheless, where surrender became strength. We've stood with David in anointed, then appointed, where waiting became worship. We've sat with Elijah in when the fire goes out, where silence became sanctuary. We've wept with Hannah in peace before the promise, where acceptance became peace. And now we meet Peter, where grace meets guilt and restores what shame tried to close. You might remember Peter from our Peace in the Storm series, the water walker who learned that peace isn't the absence of waves, it's the presence of Christ. But today, we meet Peter on a different sea. Not the storm that rages around you, but the one that rises inside of you after you fall. Because failure has a morning after. And when you wake up in the weight of regret, grace is already standing on the shore. This episode is called Peter After the Denial. Grace reopens what guilt tried to close, because shame will always say, it's over. And grace will always whisper, not yet. Pull up a chair, the table is set. The night Jesus was arrested, Peter followed at a distance, close enough to see, not close enough to be seen. A servant girl, a bystander, a voice by the fire. Weren't you with him? Not once, not twice. 3 times Peter said, I don't know the man. And then what happened? The rooster crowed. Luke says Jesus turned and looked at Peter. That look wasn't a blade. It was a mirror. Peter didn't just see what he'd done. He saw what he was capable of doing. He ran into the dark and wept bitterly. That's the suspended space between what you promised, what your loyalty required, and what you compromised or what you did. After the crucifixion, Peter disappears into silence. The one who once walked on water is now drowning in shame. He goes back to what he knows. He goes back to fishing. That's what guilt does. It sends you back to the last life that didn't ask questions, that didn't require accountability. But grace doesn't wait for you to climb your way out. Grace comes to the shore you retreated to. John 21, dawn, empty nets, tired men, a voice from the beach. Friends, have you caught any fish? They answer, no. Throw your net on the other side. They do. And the net groans with fish. John squints through the morning light and whispers, it's the Lord. Peter doesn't wait for a plan. He throws on his cloak, jumps in, and swims to Jesus. That's what grace does. It awakens your response before it solves your resume. When you recognize mercy's voice, distance stops making sense. Peter reaches the shore, and there's a charcoal fire. There's fish, there's bread, there's warmth, there's comfort. The same kind of fire he stood beside the night he denied Jesus. Think of the scenery. Jesus doesn't erase reminders. He redeems them. The place of Peter's shame becomes the table of his restoration. They eat first. No lecture. No, I told you so. Because some hearts open better to kindness than they do to inquiry or to a courtroom. After breakfast, Jesus asks, Peter, do you love me? 3 times, mirroring the denial. Each, yes, washes over, and I don't know him. This isn't interrogation, it's reconstruction. Jesus isn't asking for explanation. He's awakening Peter's identity. And with each answer, he doesn't say, prove it. He says, feed my sheep. Grace doesn't just forgive you, it recommissions you. It calls you back into who you are and who you were before the fail. On the water, Peter learned peace isn't a calm sea, it's a held hand. On the shore, he learns peace isn't a perfect record, it's a kept calling. Two anchors from two seasons. Storm lesson, keep your eyes on Jesus, not on the waves. And shore lesson, keep answering Jesus, not your guilt. When you stop rehearsing your failure and you start responding to his voice, you move from suspended to settled. Notice how public the fall was and how personal the restoration is. There was no crowd, there was no stage, no platform, no podium, just breakfast and breath. Because some restorations aren't meant to be performative, they're meant to be permanent. Grace doesn't humiliate your old self, it simply invites your healed self forward. You're not the same, you're softer, you're wiser, you're humbled, you're whole. And that's exactly the kind of leader God trusts with his sheep. See, guilt tries to close what God intends to reopen. If you're still replaying the scene, you're living suspended. If you're answering his question, do you love me? You're living settled. Peter wasn't demoted for denying Jesus. He was developed through it. Failure didn't end Peter's ministry. It made his message clear. The man who hid by a fire would later preach boldly and see thousands find life in a single day. That's what grace does with regret. What changed after the shoreline? Not the past. See, the past remains the same, but the position shifted. Peter moved from I failed him to yet he still trusts me. That settlement, the end of bargaining and the beginning of belonging again. Maybe you're standing on your own shoreline today, staring at the distance between who you were and who you want to be again. You don't have to explain yourself to grace. You just have to come home. When you stop rehearsing your failures and you start responding to his call, you'll find what Peter found. Peter found peace standing on the same shore where shame once lived. I'm Misti Green, and this is the I Lead Misti Blue podcast. Pull up your chair. The table is set for grace, for growth, and for peace that reopens what guilt tried to close.